The shuttle carrying the new cadets arrived without ceremony. No music, no announcements, no officers waiting in polished uniforms. Just a quiet docking corridor and a list of names. At the far end of the Academy's main reception hall, Instructor Vell stood by a transparent display, reviewing the list of arrivals with the detached attention of someone who had been doing this for decades. Names scrolled by, types, worlds, specializations. Most of them meant nothing. One of them made him pause, not because of rank, not because of origin, and not because of any outstanding achievements. Just one ordinary note. Marcus Hale, human, age, 25. Vial blinked, 25. He read it again, thinking the system had malfunctioned, but it hadn't. Behind him, dozens of cadets were already gathering in the reception hall, some talking quietly in their native frequency, others standing alone, watching everything with sharp, predatory stillness. Many had been training since early adolescence to get here, some since childhood. A few had been genetically prepared for combat roles before they could even walk. Most were between 17 and 20 years old. Vial's gaze returned to the name, Marcus Hale, human, 25. Late, very late. He said nothing, but he didn't scroll through the name right away. Instead, he watched the docking corridor through the transparent wall as the shuttle door opened. The cadets began to emerge in small groups. A tall, armored Virexian with ceremonial insignia along his throat plates. Two slender Cathari, moving with synchronized precision. A compact four-armed Talon whose eyes scanned every exit and structural junction in the hall. Each of them entered with the same expression on their faces. Controlled concentration, quiet ambition, or carefully concealed nerves. They all looked like cadets. Then a man came out. He didn't move like the others. There was no rigid posture. There was no ceremonial stride. He didn't try to look impressive. He walked with the calm, unhurried gait of a man who had already decided that he didn't need to prove anything in the first 10 seconds. A simple travel bag hung from one shoulder. Standard clothing issued by the Academy. No visible accessories, no distinguishing marks. He paused for a moment at the threshold of the docking station and looked around, not nervously, but attentively, like a person taking in a place he wants to remember. His gaze swept across the huge reception hall, the high ceilings, the lines of unfamiliar architecture, and finally the assembled cadets who were already waiting inside. Some of them noticed him immediately. It wasn't his appearance that attracted attention. People like him, though not common in military academies, were not unknown in wider systems. It was something else. A subtle change swept through the room as several cadets quietly checked the list posted on the side walls, names, types, age. Their eyes returned to the man, then back to the list, then back to him again. No one said anything out loud. There was no need. 25. In a place like this, that number meant a lot. By the age of 25, most cadets in known space were no longer cadets. They had already been deployed, already officers, already veterans, or casualties. You didn't start at 25. You certainly didn't start here. Marcus adjusted the strap on his bag and continued walking until he reached the main assembly area. He stopped at the outer edge of the formation rather than pushing his way to the center. He stood quietly. His arms hung loosely at his sides. He watched, without comparing himself to others, not posing, just present. Instructor Whale watched all this without moving. Interesting. A wave of quiet conversation began to spread through the reception room. Not hostile, not mocking, just curious, analytical. The way trained individuals evaluate everything that goes beyond the ordinary. The Ketar cadet tilted her head slightly, studying the man. One of the Virexians looked at the list again, clearly checking the age for the third time. Even the Talon, whose appearance rarely showed visible reactions, turned two of his 4 eyes toward Marcus, with a barely noticeable but undeniable interest. However, no one approached him. The first few minutes at the new academy quickly determined one's reputation. Most preferred to observe before making contact. Marcus seemed quite content with this. He placed his bag next to his boots, folded his arms slightly behind his back and looked at the far wall where star systems slowly revolved. For a moment, he looked less like a new cadet and more like a museum visitor. Hale finally stepped forward. The lighting in the room changed slightly as the reception procedure began. The conversations died down. The cadets instinctively stood up straight as the instructor moved to the center of the hall. "Welcome," said Hale, his voice effortlessly carrying across the room without amplification. "You have been selected from thousands of applicants from different systems. Your presence here is a testament to your potential, and nothing more." Several cadets imperceptibly changed their posture. "Potential," Hale continued, "is not an achievement, it is not a title, and it is not a promise." His gaze swept across the group. Over the next few cycles, most of you will realize that selection was the easiest part of this process. Some of you will adapt, some will not. Some will exceed expectations. He paused. And some, he added calmly, will surprise us. His gaze lingered on Marcus for a moment, just a second. Then he continued to scan the rest of the room as if nothing unusual had happened. Marcus didn't react. If he noticed the brief pause, he didn't let on. "Your first assessment will begin in an hour," Hale said. "You will be assigned temporary housing and orientation guides. Until then, remain in the reception areas. Do not enter restricted corridors. Do not initiate unscheduled simulations. And do not assume that your previous training guarantees your success here." After the last sentence, a slight wave of tension ran through the room. "Welcome to the Academy." The lights brightened slightly. Orientation markers appeared on the floor. The cadets began to move almost immediately. Some formed small groups with representatives of their race. Others set off on their own to find their assigned quarters. Marcus remained in place for a few more seconds. He didn't freeze. He didn't hesitate. He just took it all in. The huge hall, unfamiliar languages quietly echoing around him, emblems of dozens of worlds displayed along the upper tiers. Then he exhaled quietly. He picked up his bag and began to walk. As he passed one of the side windows, a cadet standing nearby, tall, armored, undoubtedly a Virexian, looked at the list again, then at Marcus. There was no hostility in his gaze, only curiosity. 25, the Virexian finally said in a quiet but not unfriendly tone. "You're starting late." Marcus stopped. He turned slightly. For a moment, it seemed he might ignore the comment entirely. Instead, he nodded slightly, almost with a smile. "Yes," he said. "I decided it wasn't worth waiting any longer." The answer was not defensive. It was not proud. It was not apologetic. It was simply honest. The Varxian studied him for another second, then nodded briefly and continued on his way without a word. Marcus watched him walk away, then set off again for his assigned quarters. High above, from the observation deck, Instructor Hale continued to review the list. His gaze returned to one line. Marcus Hale, human, age 25, late enrollment, unknown origin, no significant military achievements in file. Hale closed the display. "We'll see," he muttered quietly to himself. On the other side of the reception area, the man reached the corridor leading to the cadet barracks and disappeared from view. Just another newcomer among dozens of others. Ordinary, unremarkable, at least for now. The first assessment did not begin with weapons. It began with silence. Marcus entered training hall number 7 along with 43 other cadets, and immediately realized that this place was designed to make people feel uncomfortable. The hall was huge, much larger than necessary for a simple assessment. The high, curved walls absorbed sound so well that even dozens of footsteps created only a faint, muffled echo. The light from the overhead fixtures cast a clean, shadowless glow on the polished floor, leaving no place to hide and nothing to focus on but the upcoming assessment. In the center of the hall stood a single circular platform. No equipment, no instructors, no explanations. The cadets entered slowly, spreading out around the perimeter with the instinctive caution of trained people who find themselves in an unfamiliar environment. Some talked quietly in low voices, others remained completely still, conserving energy, watching the movements. Marcus approached the open space near the outer ring and stopped. He changed into the standard academic uniform, simple, neutral, identical to everyone else's. Without armor, insignia, or equipment specific to a particular branch, the visual differences between the cadets diminished but did not disappear. Height, posture, natural build, and movement still betrayed experience. Many of the others looked prepared, not nervous, not uncertain, prepared. Marcus slowly and unobtrusively rotated his shoulders, relaxing the stiffness from the journey. He had spent most of the previous day traveling and attending orientation briefings, and his body had not yet fully recovered. He felt it in a slight tension along his back, in a faint heaviness in his legs. Nothing dramatic. Just a small reminder that he was no longer 20. On the other side of the hall, a group of junior cadets were talking quietly. Among them were 2 Cathari and 1 Virexian. Their movements were sharp and economical. Even at rest, they held themselves like athletes on the starting line. Marcus looked at them for a moment. Then he looked away. Comparisons at this early stage were pointless. He knew that, but still, observation never hurt. A soft tonal pulse rippled through the hall. All the cadets froze. The panels along the upper wall slid back, revealing viewing windows through which silhouettes could be seen. Several instructors, perhaps senior cadets, evaluators. They were watching. A calm voice filled the hall. "Initial assessment," it said. "No preliminary briefing is necessary. Instructions will be minimal. Adaptation is expected." The round platform in the center of the room glowed faintly. "Step forward when your assignment appears." A list appeared in the air above the platform, the names slowly scrolling down. Types, identification numbers, task markers. The first name stabilized. The tall cadet with 4 limbs immediately moved toward the platform. Confident, focused, he stepped onto the illuminated circle without hesitation. The light changed. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the platform moved, not up, not down. It tilted sharp. The cadet instantly adjusted, shifting his weight to maintain balance, but the surface continued to move, rotating unpredictably beneath his feet. Small sections rose and fell in an uneven pattern, forcing him to make constant micro-adjustments. Within seconds, additional variables were activated. Sudden bursts of directed force, short flashes of disorienting light, low-frequency vibrations designed to disrupt balance. It wasn't a fight. It was balance, adaptation, control. The cadet lasted almost 3 minutes before a sudden multi-axis shift forced him off the platform. The moment his foot touched the outer floor, the lights went out and the system restarted. No applause, no comments. The next name appeared, and the next. Some lasted longer than others. Some adapted quickly, learning the rhythm of the platform, adjusting their stance and breathing to compensate for the unpredictable movements. Others relied on brute force and were thrown off in seconds when the system changed faster than their strength could compensate. Marcus watched every attempt, not just the successes, but also the failures. He paid attention to stability, to posture, to where they looked when the platform lost its balance, to how quickly they regained their balance when they lost it. Patterns emerged, subtle, but they were there. The platform was not completely random. It responded to weight distribution, tension, and excessive correction. Cadets who fought it aggressively tended to lose control faster. Those who remained relaxed, adaptive, lasted longer. He quietly noted this. The names continued to scroll. Time passed. Finally, the display changed again. Hale, Marcus. Human. Several heads turned, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge the recording. Marcus stepped forward, without haste, without hesitation. He approached the central platform and stepped onto it, placing his feet naturally rather than assuming a pre-learned stance. For a brief second, he simply stood there, feeling the surface beneath his boots. The material had a slight texture, enough to prevent slipping, but not enough to compensate for poor balance. Good to know. The light intensified. The platform moved. A sudden sideways shift forced him to adjust immediately. Marcus allowed his weight to follow the movement rather than resist it, bending his knees slightly to absorb the motion. The surface spun beneath him, then tilted sharply backward. He took a step, found his balance again, exhaled slowly, didn't fight, wasn't constrained, he just stayed put. A low vibration rippled across the platform, then one side of it dropped sharply. Marcus felt his balance shift half an inch, enough to feel the danger. He shifted his weight smoothly, correcting the situation before the movement could intensify. The seconds dragged on. The system gradually increased the difficulty, superimposing different movements on each other. Rotations, tilts, micro shifts designed to punish excessive correction. A flash of bright light attempted to disrupt his visual stability. Marcus blinked once, allowing his gaze to soften rather than fixate on specific points. Peripheral perception helped more than focused looking. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 90 seconds. His muscles began to feel tension, not excessive, but constant. Constant correction required constant attention. Small stabilizing movements quickly added up. He ignored the discomfort. He focused on his breathing, on staying relaxed. A sudden double change threw him off balance. His heel rose half a centimeter too high. For a moment, his balance wavered. He regained it, barely. The platform responded by increasing its rotation speed. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose and lowered his shoulders slightly, releasing the excess tension. Fighting the movement would quickly end everything. But if he went with the flow, he could buy some time. He lasted a little over 2 minutes. Not the best result, not the worst. In the end, a rapid sequence of opposite inclines forced him to take too wide a step. His foot touched the outer floor. The light disappeared instantly. The assessment was complete. Marcus stepped off the platform with an expressionless face and returned to the outer ring. No disappointment, no visible relief, just even breathing and a slight glint of effort on his forehead. From the observation windows above, several instructors made quiet gestures for notes. The average time for the group so far had been around 2 minutes. This person's time, slightly above average. Not exceptional, not bad. Interesting. On the floor, the cadets continued their assessments one after another. When Marcus stood on the periphery again, someone approached him. He didn't turn around right away. A moment later, a calm voice spoke. "You watched the others before stepping forward." Marcus glanced to the side. It was the Virexian who had spoken to him the day before. Tall, armored, with a straight posture. Up close, the faint patterns on the plates of his throat indicated a disciplined race. Perhaps military? Marcus shrugged slightly. "It seemed wise," he said. The Virexian considered this. "Many prefer to rely on prior preparation," he replied. "Yes," said Marcus. "I don't have that here." It wasn't self-deprecation, just a statement of fact. The Virexian studied him for another second, then nodded briefly. "Observation before action," he said. "Effective." He paused. "You adapt quickly, for someone who started late." There was no offense in the phrase, only assessment. Marcus folded his arms loosely behind his back. "I try," he replied. The platform in the center of the hall reconfigured for the next cadet. The lights changed. The names continued to be called. A moment later, the Virexian spoke again, this time more quietly. "Most who start late," he said, "don't stay long." Marcus stared at the platform, unresponsive. "Yes," he said after a second, "I used to think that too." A silence fell between them, not an awkward one, just neutral. Then Marcus added, almost casually, "It's okay." The Virexian tilted his head slightly. Marcus kept his eyes on the platform. "I didn't come here because it would be easy," he said. Not defiantly, not dramatically, just confidently. The Virexian said nothing after that, but for the first time since the assessment began, his attention shifted from the platform and focused on the person standing next to him. By the third cycle, certain patterns had emerged, not official ones. Nothing was written on the scoreboards or reflected in public rankings. The Academy did not encourage premature conclusions. But the cadets still noticed certain things. They always did. Training, Hall Number 9, was louder than the previous assessment chambers. Several simulations were conducted simultaneously in different sectors of the arena. Some focused on movement exercises, others on coordination and spatial orientation. Distant blows echoed throughout the building at irregular intervals as controlled force barriers were activated and reset. It didn't feel like an exam. It felt more like the beginning of real training. Marcus stepped onto the marked entry line with the rest of his group and waited for the orientation data to appear on the wall. The instructions were brief. This was done on purpose. The Academy preferred demonstration over explanation. Today's focus: adaptive response and decision-making timing. Simply put, react correctly or react too late, and you fail. A wide modular field stretched out before them. Sections of the floor rose and fell at different speeds. Transparent barriers appeared without warning, creating temporary corridors or blocking direct paths. Overhead, emitters projected changing markers that the cadets had to reach in a specific sequence, avoiding moving obstacles. Nothing here was random, but it seemed random if you didn't pay attention. Marcus surveyed the field, silently calculating distances and changes in elevation. He wasn't the fastest in the group. That was obvious. Some cadets had natural advantages in stride or species-specific agility that made it easier for them to move, so speed wasn't his strong suit here. Perhaps it was time. Begin. The field activated instantly. The platform shifted. The barriers rose. Markers appeared at different levels. The cadets set off. Some immediately rushed forward, relying on acceleration and agility to reach the first group of markers before the environment became completely destabilized. Others paused just long enough to anticipate the initial movement before moving on. Marcus took a step forward, but not at full speed. He watched the first sequence unfold rather than rushing blindly into it. The barrier locked in 2 meters ahead of one of the rushing cadets, forcing him to stop abruptly and change direction. Another platform dropped sharply, throwing off anyone who had moved too quickly with too much weight on it. Marcus adjusted his route without hitting any of the obstacles, not reacting too late, reacting ahead of time. He moved through the first section at a controlled pace, conserving energy and keeping track of the field's rhythm. The markers pulsed in short sequences. Left quadrant, upper tier, lower center. Each required reaching a specific window before moving on to the next. He skipped the first window on purpose, better to understand the system than to blindly follow it. By the second sequence, he had already managed to synchronize. Step, half tactical pause. Move when the platform stabilized, not before. He reached the next marker without any problems. Around him, the field became even more chaotic. Several cadets tried to rely on speed, jumping from point to point when obstacles appeared. Some succeeded thanks to their athletic training. Others collided with sudden obstacles or miscalculated changes in height and were forced to start over. Marcus maintained his self-control. He was not in the lead, but he was not lagging behind either. Above the arena, observation panels tracked every movement. Instructors monitored not only who reached the markers the fastest, but also how they adapted to changing conditions. Excessive effort, hesitation, efficiency. The man's performance attracted quiet attention. Not exceptional speed, not exceptional strength, but a minimum of wasted movements. He learned quickly from his mistakes. He adjusted his route on the fly. He rarely repeated the same mistake twice. When an obstacle suddenly blocked his path, he didn't try to break through or freeze. He changed his route almost instantly, losing only a second before regaining his rhythm. Efficient. On the field, Marcus felt the tension gradually building. Constant adjustments required concentration and steady breathing. His legs were working harder than he was showing. The muscles that had already been strained during previous assessments were feeling the accumulated fatigue. He ignored it, not pretending it wasn't there, simply accepting it and continuing regardless. A new sequence of markers activated at the upper level. Several cadets accelerated toward the nearest lifting ramps. One of them reached it first with impressive speed, but found that the ramp had retracted a little too early. He had to change direction abruptly, losing his position. Marcus had already slowed down. He glanced once at the ramp's movement, and then stepped onto it just as it stabilized for the next cycle. No wasted sprints, no sudden corrections, just perfect timing. He reached the top marker without any problems. On the other side of the arena, two cadets exchanged a brief glance. Their species specialized in synchronized movements and predictable coordination. They recognized efficiency when they saw it. "Human," one of them said quietly over the low-frequency channel. The other nodded slightly. Below, the sequence intensified. Several markers activated simultaneously at different heights, forcing the cadets to quickly choose their routes. Some prioritized speed, trying to cover as much ground as possible before the next change. Others focused on accuracy, ensuring a clean hit on each marker. Marcus chose the sequence. He wouldn't lead the class, but he also wouldn't burn out early. Step, adjust, move when it made sense. Stop wasting energy on impossible windows. The field changed again, this time faster. A sudden sequence of multi-directional barriers forced several cadets into tight spaces. One of them misjudged the closing interval and collided with a transparent wall, stumbling back with visible frustration. Marcus changed his route before he reached the same spot. First, observation, then action. It cost him half a second, but it saved 3. Minutes passed. Gradually, breathing on the field became more difficult. Movements lost some of their sharpness as fatigue set in. Even the naturally fast began to show small flaws, missteps, delays in reactions, unnecessary bursts of speed. Marcus felt it too, a constant burning in his legs, tightness in his shoulders. He still controlled his pace. Don't rush, don't panic, just keep moving. When the last sequence of markers ended, the field shut down without warning. The platforms leveled out. The barriers disappeared. A sudden silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the sound of the controlled breathing of 44 cadets. The assessment was complete. Marcus stepped off the field and shrugged once lightly to release the accumulated tension. Sweat soaked the back of his training shirt, but his breathing quickly stabilized. Not the first, not the last, a constant. Around him, the cadets silently analyzed their performances. Some looked satisfied. Others were clearly recalculating their strength for next time. The Academy rarely provided instant feedback. Self-assessment was part of the process. As Marcus moved toward the hydration station along the wall, he gradually realized that he was being watched again. Not openly, not rudely, just noticed. A cadet Qatari stopped mid-conversation as he passed by. One of the talents glanced in his direction. Even 2 junior cadets near the far wall glanced briefly at him before returning to their conversation. Not because he dominated the assessment, but because he didn't. And yet, he was still there, still steady, still improving with each cycle. From his vantage point above, Instructor Vell reviewed the performance metrics scrolling across his display. Marcus Hale, human reaction delay, improven error repetition rate, low energy expenditure, controlled adaptation curve. Steep Vale leaned back slightly. Not a genius, not elite, but the trajectory was remarkable. Below, Marcus finished at the hydration station and turned to leave. At that moment, a familiar voice spoke from his right. "You're conserving energy," said the Virexian cadet. Marcus looked back. "Trying not to burn out in the first week," he replied. The Virexian thought for a moment. "Many try to prove themselves right at the beginning," he said. Marcus smiled weakly, wearily. "Yes, I'm more interested in staying here in the long run." The Virexian paused for a moment. Then he said quietly, "You're adapting faster than the initial predictions." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. "I didn't know there were predictions." "There are always predictions," said the Virexian. A short pause. Then he added, "You are being watched." Marcus followed his gaze upward to the darkened surveillance panels. He couldn't make out anyone behind the tinted surfaces. He looked back at the Virexian. He shrugged slightly. "Okay," he said simply. "No arrogance, no nerves, just acceptance." He adjusted the strap of his training bag and headed for the exit. Behind him, the Virexian watched him for a few seconds, then turned away. Conversations resumed throughout the training hall. The evaluation began again. Another day at the academy continued, and somewhere amid the growing data on results and quiet discussions among the cadets, a subtle change began to take shape. The person who had arrived late, older than most, unremarkable on paper, was no longer just a curiosity on the list. She was becoming consistent. And in a place where many flashed brightly and quickly failed, consistency began to stand out. By the end of the first week, exhaustion had become the norm. The academy did not believe in gradually introducing cadets to the routine. The schedule changed without warning. Assessments overlapped. Physical training transitioned directly into tactical simulations, which then transitioned into lengthy sessions of strategic analysis with minimal recovery time in between. Sleep existed, just not always when you wanted it. Marcus felt it in the constant heaviness behind his eyes and the constant pain in his shoulders. Nothing debilitating, just a constant reminder that his body was working harder than it had in years. He adapted, slower than some, faster than others, but he adapted. Training Room 12 was quieter than the others. It was more of a tactical simulation chamber than a physical arena. The room was arranged in tiers, surrounding a central projection field where terrain changes and mission data could be displayed in full spatial detail. Today's task, coordinating small units with limited information. No combat yet, just decisions. Marcus took his assigned place without comment and looked at the interface in front of him. Three-dimensional maps of the terrain slowly rotated above the console, highlighting elevation lines, structural diagrams, and potential movement corridors. The side panel scrolled through environmental conditions, low visibility, unstable communication, unknown variables, a standard academy scenario. Across the room, the cadets took their places. Some quickly scanned the data, clearly familiar with such simulations. Others quickly exchanged quiet assessments with their teammates. Some stood completely still, conserving their mental energy until the briefing began. Marcus just stared at the map, not memorizing everything at once. He simply allowed the plan to gradually take root in his mind. Someone approached the neighboring station. He didn't look up immediately. He already knew who it was. "You prefer observation to combat," said the cadet from Varex calmly. Marcus allowed himself a slight amusement. "Lately, that seems to be my thing." The Varexian tilted his head slightly. "I am Creel," he said. "A first-line Varexian?" Marcus looked at him. "Marcus." There was a brief pause, neutral, not awkward. Then Creel looked back at the rotating map of the area. "You have been assigned late entry status," he said. "Independent assessment." "Yes." "You have not specified a specialization." "Not yet." Creel studied the projection of the area for another second. "That's unusual." Marcus leaned his elbows lightly on the console. "Still figuring out where I fit in," he said. Before Creel could respond, the lights in the chamber dimmed slightly and the central projection expanded. The relief stabilized, transforming into a detailed simulation. Ruined city buildings, uneven terrain, areas of limited visibility. Numerous target markers appeared on the map. Instructor Vell's voice filled the chamber. "Scenario, reconnaissance and evacuation," he said. "You will be assigned to temporary units of 4. No leadership will be assigned. The outcome will depend on adaptation and coordination." The tasks flashed on each console. Marcus quickly scanned them. Unit 7. Krell, Varexian Tess, Cathari Joran, Talon Marcus. Human Marcus glanced sideways at Krell. "Well," he said quietly, "that answers the question." Krell nodded in agreement. The simulation activated throughout the room. The projection field expanded to full immersion mode. Each unit stations were connected to a shared tactical interface, allowing them to track movements in real time and receive feedback about their surroundings. The terrain changed slightly under the influence of dynamic variables. Their objectives pulsed, reach designated reconnaissance points, collect data, and exit without triggering enemy detection protocols. In theory, it was simple. In practice, it was complicated. Jorin, the Talon, spoke first. His voice was clear and efficient. I'll take care of scanning ahead, he said. Polygonal visual. Agreed, added Tess. I'll maintain signal integrity and mapping. Krell's gaze shifted across the terrain. I'll handle the main route selection. A brief pause. Then all three looked at Marcus. Not hostile, just waiting. Marcus looked at the map for half a second. I'll keep track of time, he said. Movement windows. If anything shifts or closes behind us, I'll let you know. Krell nodded briefly. Accepted. No further discussion was needed. They began. The simulation environment responded instantly to their movements. The virtual terrain unfolded as their group advanced through the ruined urban area. Visibility fluctuated. The signal was interrupted by periodic flashes. Paths, which seemed clear one moment, narrowed or disappeared the next. Marcus kept a close eye on the time overlay, barrier cycles, signal drops, movement delays between sections. He didn't give constant instructions. He only spoke when necessary. Wait half a second, he said once, as Krell was about to move down a narrow corridor. Krell stopped. Structural change had destroyed part of the corridor right where he would have stepped. A new path opened 2 meters to the left. Krell moved on without comment. Later, as they approached the first reconnaissance marker, Tess adjusted the signal mapping to maintain communication in the dense interference zone. The signal flickered dangerously, almost disappearing. 3 seconds, Marcus said quietly. Then it will stabilize. Tess hesitated just long enough. The interference disappeared right on schedule. Acknowledged, said the Cathari. They reached their first target without incident. On the other side of the camera, other units were not so fortunate. Some of them activated detection protocols, moving too quickly through unstable areas. One lost its mapping completely when the signal coordination failed. Another fell apart and wasted valuable time regrouping. Unit 7 remained stable. Not fast, not flashy, just effective. As they approached the extraction point, the variable environments intensified. Simulated enemy detection grids combed the terrain at irregular intervals. Moving at the wrong moment would result in mission failure. Marcus looked at the combing pattern once, twice. Move now, he said quietly. They moved between sweeps with a few seconds to spare. Extraction marker reached. Simulation complete. The projection vanished instantly, and the room was once again bathed in soft, neutral light. Each station began collecting summary data, although the full results would be reviewed later. Marcus leaned back slightly, releasing the tension from his shoulders. Krell paused for a moment, reviewing the completed route on the display. Then he looked at Marcus. You predicted 3 environmental changes before they happened, he said. Marcus shrugged slightly. Just watching the patterns? Tess tilted her head, studying him with open curiosity rather than simple awareness. You don't move the fastest, she said. You don't calculate the fastest, but your sense of timing reduces the number of mistakes. Marcus smiled weakly, wearily. I have experience in making mistakes, he said. I try not to repeat them if I can help it. Joran, the Talon, clicked his tongue softly, perhaps in approval. Krell turned fully toward him. For a cadet who joined late, the Virexian said calmly, your presence increases the effectiveness of the unit. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Just a straightforward assessment. But in a place where every word was weighed, it carried weight. Marcus met his gaze for a second. Thank you, he said simply. Across the room, other units were finishing their simulations. Cadets began to talk quietly, analyzing results and revising their expectations. From the observation level above, Instructor Vell watched the final data tally. Unit 7, execution time. Above average detection triggers, none coordination effectiveness, high leader designation. Undetermined Vell's gaze lingered on the last line for a moment. Undetermined. Interesting. Below, the cadets began to move out for their next scheduled rotation. Marcus slowly gathered his things and walked away from the station. As he headed for the exit, Krell approached him. Not out of duty, not out of curiosity, just naturally. You adapt quickly, Krell said after a moment. Marcus exhaled quietly. "I'm trying to stay in the program," he replied. Crail thought for a moment. "You'll stay," he said. It wasn't encouragement. It wasn't optimism. Just a statement of fact. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Marcus allowed himself the slightest hint of a real smile as they walked out into the hallway with the rest of the cadets. It wasn't loud. There was no celebration. But somewhere between quiet observations and steady work, something had changed. He was no longer just a latecomer. He was becoming reliable. And in an academy built on results and survival, reliability was the first form of respect. By the middle of the week, rumors began to spread. Not gossip, not chatter, but subtle, intriguing details that permeated the academy like shifting currents. Why did Marcus Hale, a 25-year-old man, wait so long to apply? Most cadets entered the academy as teenagers, some as young as 16. By the age of 25, they were either officers, veterans, or gone. No one knew why he was there, and no one dared to ask him directly. Marcus, however, did not hide. He simply did not say more than was necessary. That evening, the cadets of the 7th Unit gathered after training in a dimly lit common room. The walls hummed quietly from the energy stabilizers that diffused soft light throughout the room. Creel, Tess, and Joran were already seated, reviewing data from that day's simulation. Marcus entered quietly, carrying his standard rations. He paused, quickly scanning the room. "Sit down," said Creel without looking up. Marcus nodded and joined them. There was a silence, not an awkward one, but a deliberate one. Each cadet reflected on the day. Finally, Tess broke the silence. "You didn't start young," she said. Her voice was calm, analytical. "Most of the cadets here trained for years before entering the academy. You started late. Why?" Marcus set down the tray and took a slow breath. He didn't defend himself. He didn't evade. He just looked at her, considering how much to reveal. "Earth," he began. "I lived a normal life for a long time. Work, family, responsibilities. I didn't think about the academy until recently." Creel raised an eyebrow. "A normal life? At 25? You mean a civilian job, a peaceful profession? That's unusual." Marcus nodded. "Yes. For most of my adult life, I was involved in things that had nothing to do with combat, interstellar politics, or survival simulations. I knew I was late. I knew it wouldn't be easy to come here. I didn't come for the glory. I came because it was the right call." Joran clicked his tongue softly, which in Talani meant interest. "You chose this yourself," he said. "You weren't forced, not drafted. You decided to leave the life where you were safe." Marcus nodded again. "That's right. I knew I was behind, and I knew I had to catch up faster than everyone else, but I also knew I could do it if I stayed focused." Tess tilted her head slightly. "That explains your watch-first approach. You're used to learning from your mistakes, from experience, rather than from expectations." Marcus smiled a weak, tired smile. "Something like that. I've had enough time to realize that mistakes are expensive, and I've had enough failures to know how to survive them." Crail leaned back slightly. "You speak with a confidence that most cadets here only acquire after years of training. But you still lack training at this level. That combination is dangerous." Marcus shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe it just means I have to use what I have more wisely." There was silence in the room for a long time. Then Creel finally said, "I understand why Vel watches you so closely. Not because you're human, not because you're late, but because you adapt." Marcus didn't answer. He just ate quietly, a faint smile still lingering on the corners of his lips. Tess spoke softly again. "Most cadets your age would have been expelled if they hadn't prepared themselves. But here you are, steadfast, consistent, unbreakable. I don't know many who could do that." Marcus met her gaze. "Me neither. But I've always believed it's better to try late than never." Joran clicked his tongue softly again. "People are strange," he said. "You accept difficulties instead of fighting them. You learn from them instead of ignoring them." Marcus nodded. "Strange, perhaps, but effective." Creel finally exhaled through his nostrils, a Varric gesture of recognition. We'll see how long you remain effective. Academic life does not forgive mistakes." Marcus leaned back slightly. "Me too." For the first time, the cadets of the 7th Division looked at him differently. He was no longer just a latecomer, not yet a leader, not yet a prodigy, but someone who had consciously chosen this path, and someone who might last longer than anyone expected. Outside, the hum of the academy continued. Somewhere high above, observation panels quietly recorded the evening's discussions. Indicators, time, reactions, everything was recorded. And somewhere in this silence, the data was being updated. Marcus Hale, human, 25 years old. Potential, unknown. Observation required. It was not praise. It was not a warning. It was the first acknowledgement that he was not just a latecomer. He was, slowly but surely, a man to be respected. The next morning, the alarm went off without warning. The cadets rushed out of their rooms, dressed in their standard training suits, and prepared their equipment for the day's exercises. Marcus moved at a steady pace, unhurried but efficiently. He didn't run or overexert himself. He realized early on that endurance was more important than speed. By the time he reached Training Hall number 14, most of the cadets had already gathered in their units. Unit 7 assembled quickly. Krell, Tess, Joran, and Marcus. Each of them was filled with the quiet concentration of those who understood that mistakes here were costly. Instructor Vell appeared on the screen above their heads, his voice calm but unmistakably authoritative. Today's task: evacuation and rescue simulation in various terrain conditions. The goal: to extract target units from several areas under time constraints and adverse environmental conditions. Communication will be limited. The terrain will be unpredictably. Success will depend on adaptation and teamwork. Marcus looked at the diagram for the first time. Several areas, some open, some narrow corridors, several raised platforms with unstable surfaces. Environmental conditions changed in real time, and simulated hazards appeared suddenly. Adrenaline didn't rush to his head. He was above that. Instead, concentration took over. "Your unit is starting in Zone 3, said Krell, surveying the area. "I'll lead the way through the main approach. Marcus?" "I'll keep track of time and hazard patterns," Marcus replied. "Report any changes if something destabilizes the route." Tess and Joran nodded, each naturally settling into their roles. The simulation began. The terrain changed immediately. Platforms slid at unexpected angles, corridors narrowed, and virtual hazards, simulated energy pulses and collapsing walls, forced them to react quickly. Many cadets blindly rushed toward the dangers. Unit 7 did not. Marcus instantly noticed the patterns, the rotation of the platforms, the timing of the dangers, the changes in height. He shouted, "The left ramp is moving back in 2 cycles. Hold your position." Krell stopped, adjusted his movement, and the unit avoided disaster. Later, as they made their way through the collapsing corridor, Marcus noticed the sequence of falling debris. 3 seconds. Wait. Move after the impulse." Tess hesitated, then followed him. They avoided collision by milliseconds. Unit 7 moved with precision. Not the fastest, but coordinated. Mistakes were minimized. Efficiency was maximized. During a particularly chaotic section, a sudden simulated collapse blocked the main exit. Krell assessed alternative routes. Marcus examined the overlay and pointed to a second corridor that allowed them to maintain their pace without risking danger. Krell nodded instantly. The team followed him. The exercise ended with all 4 units remaining intact and the target units being rescued. Other teams were not so lucky. Some of them provoked conditions for failure, lost virtual targets, or miscalculated the time. Unit 7 was the only team that completed the exercise without any serious failures. When the simulation ended, Marcus did not celebrate. He simply straightened up, relaxed his shoulders, and looked at his unit. Krell broke the silence. "You adapt faster than expected for someone who started late. Your timing saved the unit." Marcus shook his head slightly. "I just pay close attention, that's all." Tess studied him closely. "You observe more than you act. Most cadets rush. You choose when to intervene." Marcus smiled slightly. Better to act at the right moment than too soon. Joran clicked his tongue softly. Approval, barely noticeable, but palpable. Above, Instructor Vell watched the simulation readings on the panel. He whispered, almost to himself, "Potential is being realized. Slowly. Interesting." Marcus looked back at his team. He wasn't a leader yet, but he was becoming someone they could rely on. And in the academy, that was often the first step to respect. When they left the simulation chamber, Krell gave a brief nod. "Keep it up. Others will notice." Marcus nodded, adjusting the strap on his bag. "I intend to." The day was far from over, but for the first time, Marcus felt that being late didn't mean falling behind. Not entirely. Somewhere in the corridors of the academy, a subtle recognition was growing. Marcus Hale, 25, was no longer just a curiosity. He was a member of the team, and in a place built on survival, teamwork could be as powerful as strength. In the second week, Marcus sensed subtle changes in his surroundings. Cadets who had previously looked at him with polite curiosity now studied him with a hint of caution. The deceased man wasn't just present. He moved through the academy on his own terms, and that made others uneasy. The next task was different. No instructions, no prior briefing, just a single line that appeared on the camera's center panel. Individual test. Test your limits. Adapt. Survive. The room was huge, the likes of which Marcus had never seen before. Panels along the walls shifted, creating a maze of corridors, platforms, and observation decks. A low hum echoed beneath their feet. The changing environmental parameters, gravity fluctuations, moving barriers, visual distortions, were programmed to test reflexes, endurance, and decision-making under pressure. The other cadets quickly entered, rushing to take up advantageous positions. Marcus moved more slowly, cautiously. He was in no hurry. First, observation, then assessment, action when necessary. To take up advantageous positions, Marcus moved more slowly, cautiously. He was in no hurry. First, observation, then assessment, action when necessary. He had learned that reacting too early often led to mistakes. The first danger was activated almost immediately. The gravitational fields shifted unexpectedly, knocking some cadets off balance out of balance. A cadet from Varex jumped forward but misjudged the rotating platform and fell back several meters, uttering low-frequency guttural sounds that escaped from his throat openings. Marcus walked cautiously, micro-adjusting each step. The changes were subtle but precise, and his body instinctively memorized these patterns. He moved like a person who had already learned to obey his environment rather than imposing his own path on it. Suddenly, a high-speed obstacle descended from above. Most of the cadets froze. Marcus anticipated this half a second before the impact, adjusted his stance, and passed under the obstacle without breaking his rhythm. Further on, the narrow corridor branched into several offshoots, each of which contained a separate sequence of dangers. Marcus paused, only for a moment, weighing his options based on what he had observed in the first few minutes. He chose a path that others had ignored, one that required more cautious steps but minimized risk. Within seconds, half of the cadets on the adjacent paths triggered virtual failure sensors. He did not gloat. He did not react. He just kept moving. A distant pulse in the chamber signaled the appearance of the final obstacle, a destructive multi-level platform with rotating sections and energy pulses designed to throw cadets off balance. Most rushed forward recklessly. Marcus assessed the sequence: time, rotation speed, pulse intervals. Step by step, he crossed the unstable surface, constantly adjusting his movements, barely losing momentum. Finally, when the test ended with a quiet fade of the environmental systems, Marcus completed the course without a single serious mistake. Others failed, stumbled, or miscalculated. He was neither the first nor the last. He was the only cadet to complete the test completely unscathed, remaining steady throughout. He stepped off the platform, his chest rising and falling, sweat soaking his uniform. Creel, who had been watching from the side panel, approached quietly. "Steady," Creel said. "Not the fastest, not the strongest, but unbreakable." Marcus smiled slightly. Better to survive than to impress. Tess, standing nearby, nodded slowly. You make thoughtful choices. Most cadets your age, considering your late start, would barely make it through half the course. Marcus looked at her. I had more time than most to understand patience and timing. That doesn't make me better, just different. Joran clicked quietly in agreement. From above, Instructor Vell's gaze lingered on the display panel longer than usual. Marcus Hale, human. Task completed. No casualties. Error rate, minimal. Adaptability, high. He didn't stand out for his strength. He didn't dominate with speed. He stood out because he endured, adapted, and observed. At the Academy, endurance and intellect often mattered more than natural talent. And for the first time, quiet recognition began to spread. Marcus Hale was no longer just late. He was beginning to command respect, even among cadets who had been training for years, even among those who believed a person could not keep up. Even here, in the unforgiving halls of the Interstellar Academy, Marcus was beginning to make his mark, and he wasn't done yet. As the days passed, Marcus's consistency became more and more apparent with each training session. The Academy cadets, who had previously treated him like a curiosity, began to treat him differently. Not with friendship, not yet with friendship, but with cautious recognition. This change became noticeable during tactical exercises involving different species. The chamber was large, divided into several zones, each simulating different planetary environments. The units were given coordinated tasks: reconnaissance, rescue, and controlled engagement. Unit 7 operated as usual. Krell commanded, Tess maintained signal integrity, and Joran handled surveillance. Marcus, as always, monitored time, environmental models, and the sequence of hazards. The training began chaotically. In one zone, gravity suddenly changed. In another, a simulated sandstorm reduced visibility, and holographic obstacles forced constant adjustments. Where other units struggled, Marcus was quiet, but effectively managed his team. A small adjustment to the route here, a call to keep to the schedule there. Minor interventions, barely noticeable, but they prevented mistakes that would have cost other units significant progress. In the end, Unit 7 completed all tasks ahead of schedule, without losses or damage. The other teams were slower, and some made several mistakes. After the exercises, the cadets gathered in the debriefing area. Instructor Val appeared on the screen above their heads, his voice calm and authoritative. Unit 7's results exceeded expectations. Coordination, adaptation, and efficiency were impressive. Marcus Hale, the human, demonstrated exceptional stability under pressure, improving the team's results without being assigned a leadership position. His observation and knowledge application skills are exceptional for a cadet who entered the academy late. The crowd murmured. The cadets exchanged glances. The recognition was subtle but clear. Krell approached Marcus as the hall emptied. "You're hard to classify," he said quietly. "Most cadets who start late can't keep up with the pace. You don't lead, but the unit succeeds because of you." Marcus smiled slightly. "I don't need to lead to make a difference. Time is more important than ego." Tess added quietly, "You deserve more than just curiosity. You deserve respect." Marcus nodded, quietly but firmly. "Thank you. That means more than praise." Joran clicked lightly, expressing his agreement. Somewhere high above, Instructor Vell made a small note. The indicators were updated, the patterns recorded. The human cadet was no longer just a participant. He was a variable to be considered, a factor that others, both cadets and instructors, had begun to respect. And Marcus, he didn't brag, he didn't show off. He just kept going, step by step, exercise by exercise, observation by observation. Because at the academy, consistency, adaptability, and quiet intelligence often mattered more than speed, strength, or natural talent. For the first time, he felt it. He wasn't just surviving. He had become someone who could endure and perhaps even lead without having to try. The academy was no longer a place of the unknown for him. It was a place of trials. And Marcus was passing those trials. Weeks passed. The Academy, with its endless simulations, sudden rotations, and grueling physical and mental tests, was no longer completely foreign to Marcus. He knew the patterns, he knew the rhythm, and he had learned to move with it, not against it. Unit 7 stood together in the largest room yet, the Great Simulation Hall. Today's goal was simple in description but extremely difficult to accomplish: to complete a multi-stage mission that included environmental hazards, reconnaissance, and timely extraction. No instructions, no pauses, no room for error. The room came alive with moving platforms, rotating walls, and areas of variable gravity. Other units rushed forward, trying to dominate the mission with speed and brute force. Most of them failed immediately. Marcus paused. He watched. He calculated. Krell prepared the unit. Tess and Joran adjusted their positions, and Marcus waited for the perfect moment. Then they moved, step by step, sequence by sequence. Marcus anticipated changes in gravity, platform rotations, and environmental impulses. Each adjustment was subtle, but perfectly synchronized. When a collapsing corridor threatened to split the unit, Marcus ordered a slight change in route. When a sudden impulse threatened Tessa's card signal, he ordered a slight adjustment in timing. Unit 7 moved as if guided by a silent, invisible hand. In a few minutes, the final exit point appeared. The mission was flawlessly executed. No casualties among the cadets, no mistakes, no errors. There was a moment of silence. Then the voice of Instructor Vell sounded, calm but so powerful that it filled the entire room. Unit 7, you completed all tasks with precision, not the fastest, not the strongest, but without mistakes. An exceptional result. Cadet Marcus Hale, your contribution is recognized as significant. You are no longer just a participant. You are an important variable in the success of this unit. The cadets around them exchanged glances. A quiet but undeniable respect swept through the room. Marcus felt it. Not the loud praise some craved, but something much more valuable: recognition. Krell approached him first. You exceeded expectations. Your observation and timing, they are the foundation of this unit. Without your contribution, we would have failed. Marcus smiled slightly. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it needed to be done. Tess nodded. That's more than enough. Even Joran, always reserved, quietly snapped his fingers, a Italian gesture of approval. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Marcus realized something important. He wasn't just surviving. He wasn't just keeping up with cadets who had been training for years. He was thriving. The human cadet who had joined late was older than most and not particularly physically strong, had found his place. Through observation, adaptation, and quiet determination, he had carved out a path for himself in a world that believed he could not be a part of it. And in a place where survival, skill, and consistency were paramount, Marcus Hale proved one undeniable truth. You don't have to be the first to make a difference. You don't have to be the strongest to be a leader. Sometimes persistence, intelligence, and steadfast determination are enough to earn respect and completely change the game. As the cadets left the hall, whispers followed them. Not about his appearance, not about his age, not about his late entry. They whispered about Marcus Hale, the man who persevered, the cadet who adapted, the one who quietly became extraordinary. And Marcus? He walked steadily, his shoulders relaxed, his heart calm, and his gaze fixed ahead. The Academy had tested him. The Academy had challenged him, and Marcus Hale passed the test, not by chance, not by strength, but by will. A smile appeared on his lips, barely noticeable, but sincere. He was ready for everything that awaited him ahead.